Hey, GCC family, hope you guys are doing well today. You know, when I was just graduated from college, I started working at an inner city church under the direction of a man named Pastor Scott. And he's an awesome dude, but whenever I would greet him, I would always say, "Hey, Pastor Scott, how you doing? It's good to see you." And he would say, "Hey, Nathan, it's good to be seen." And I always thought that was kind of a strange way to reply to that, kind of abnormal. And it made me wonder, why does he say it's good to be seen? Because, from my perspective, the man was being seen all the time. He was the head pastor. He preached on Sunday mornings. He ran the youth group. He ran other activities. He was literally in front of people all the time. He was always being seen. But eventually I realized that just because he was seen by people doesn't mean that he actually felt like people saw him. Even though people were always looking at him, I think that very rarely did people ever actually see him. Being surrounded by people, he felt invisible. It's good to be seen. I myself have felt that many times, and I'm sure many of you have also felt that sense that even though we're always being looked at by people, we're very rarely truly seen by them. I remember in high school, I was just so awkward and weird, and I had a super hard time making friends, and I sat at so many lonely lunch tables because even though people saw me, nobody really saw me. Nobody took the time to stop and spend time with me. It reminds me of this passage in Matthew chapter 9. Jesus is preaching the gospel, going around healing people, and eventually he gets to this moment in chapter 9, verse 9, and here's what it says. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" In some translations, that phrase says, "Why does your teacher eat with such scum?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners." Of all the people in the ancient world who probably felt invisible, I'm guessing tax collectors were probably at close to the top of that list. Tax collectors, especially someone like Matthew, who was a Jewish person collecting taxes for the Roman Empire, they would have been seen as almost enemies of the common person. And many of them were super, super unethical, and they would take more taxes than what was actually owed and keep the difference for themselves. You can see kind of the detail of that in the story of Jesus with Zacchaeus. Matthew, I imagine, would have felt totally invisible. But Jesus saw him. Could you imagine what it would have been like sitting in your tax collector's booth? People might look at you. Some of them might go to the far side of the road just to avoid you. I would imagine that you're so lonely, you're so used to people just seeing your title, just avoiding you at all costs, and then all of a sudden this famous rabbi shows up, and he doesn't go around you. He doesn't judge you like the other Pharisees and religious leaders. In fact, he sees you. And he doesn't just see you, he stops. And he calls you out by name and says, "Come, follow me." And he doesn't stop there. He eats a meal in your house with many tax collectors and disreputable sinners. Could you imagine what that would be like? Jesus saw people. I wonder how many people like you listening, how many of you have felt invisible at some point or another? My guess is that if we're honest, we're all, most like 99%, if not 100% of us have at least at one point in our lives felt invisible. I guarantee you there's people around us who feel invisible all the time. How can we see them? What's one way that you can see your neighbor just like Jesus saw Matthew?